Let me go ahead then and get right into the subject. I would like for you to consider yourself as you are, which is a congregation of the Church of God. But I want you to put yourselves in the seat of some of those who have gone before us, congregations of the Church of God that we read about in the book of Revelation. I think all of us are familiar with the book of Revelation and chapters 2 and 3 that discuss the message of Christ to the churches, the 7 churches that occupied a unique position there in Asia Minor. And the messages to those churches are fascinating. There are 7 of them that are mentioned. And this particular presentation this morning is going to deal with what John said as the apostle who received that revelation from Christ and wrote it down as he saw it when he was exiled there on the island of Patmos. We're going to deal with that this morning in this particular presentation, the message that went especially to the church in the city of Pergamos. You'll see the 7 churches there in Asia Minor, Western Asia Minor, that we are familiar with, beginning with Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and then Laodicea. I think you all know that these churches were 7 in number. They were on a mail route there in Asia Minor. And what John received in Revelation on the Isle of Patmos, just off the coast here in the ocean, he sent to these churches, and it is recorded there, of course, in the entire book of Revelation, but there were 7 distinct messages to these 7 congregations that take on a very interesting role when it comes to the development of the church throughout time, from the first century to our day. And the messages there, I think, are timeless to all of God's people, regardless of what particular point in time the people exist. All of us today can gain understanding from all of these messages to these churches. So it's not necessarily just relegated to just one church or to one period of the church. We can learn from all of that is mentioned here. But there specifically was one congregation that I want to zero into this morning, and the message to the church in the city of Pergamos in chapter 2 of Revelation, beginning in verse 12, where we read that to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, "These things says he who has the sharp, two-edged sword." And go on in verse 13, it says, "I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days which Antipas, which was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you where Satan dwells." Now here in verse 13 of this letter to the church at Pergamos, it is mentioned that they dwell where Satan dwells. Now again, put yourself in the seat of the congregation receiving this letter. Keep in mind that the people in Pergamos were not a people that looked upon the letter that came to them that particular Sabbath that it was read to them from John, who they recognized as the leader of the church. This was not something that they were reading and saying, this is an interesting Bible passage. They really didn't even look at it as the Bible or necessarily inspired Scripture the way we look at it today. Keep in mind that this was a fresh letter coming from the leader of the church, John. And he was telling them something that they needed to focus on for their immediate surroundings and circumstances. And he tells them here in verse 13 that you dwell where Satan's throne is. He tells them that twice in this one verse. You dwell where Satan dwells. Where you live is where Satan has a throne. Now that city of Pergamos would have given them things to think about. That message would have, as they left the congregation that day, they would have begun to wonder, what in the world was he talking about? I don't think they wondered too long, as they would have left and walked the streets of their city and coming to an understanding of what he was referring to. In fact, they probably understood even as they sat there in the seats of their location. Let me take you to Pergamos, or at least the ruins of Pergamos here, by virtue of these pictures here for a moment, just to help us get a little bit of a feel and a setting. This is a section of a large amphitheater, one of the largest amphitheaters from the ancient world that is in the city of Pergamos, as it is today, at least the ruins of the city of Pergamos. There was a very large amphitheater there, and today if you go there, as some of our members did just a few weeks ago when we had the tour of these churches in Turkey, by a number of members who were there. You will see and would see a city that no longer exists in the form that it did in the first century, but the ruins are there and quite prominent, the typical type of ruins that you would see from the first century period, the Roman world as they have survived. Ruins of a partial colonnade of a temple that is there, and you can see the area around Pergamus has a number of hills. It's in a hilly region. This is remains of a street within Pergamus as it is. You would see it at this time. And this particular picture is a little larger view of the same amphitheater. And we have up here a drawn-in outline. I asked Scott Ashley, who was on that tour just a few weeks ago, to get some pictures to add to this presentation for me. And you'll see the modern city spread out below this large acropolis, this large hill that goes up about 1,000 feet in the city where the ancient city stood. You had this large Roman amphitheater, and we're going to target and we're going to zero in on this little place here, because in the time of the first century, this was the city. All of this really didn't exist at that time. The city was on this large hill with all the temples and the large Roman buildings and the amphitheater, and this particular site right here, a couple of trees jutting up out of it right now, is a site we're kind of zero in on. This was the site of a large altar that stood in the city of Pergamus during the time when John wrote this letter to the church in Pergamus in the first century. There are three, look like pine trees that grow up out of it at this point, but this gives you the configuration of a rather large altar that stood at that time. This is the platform of that altar, and it would have been looking out over the valley below from this very, very high position within the city. This is the platform, again, a little bit closer view of it, that where this large altar stood on the city of Pergamus. Pergamus had, as its realm at that time, a number of temples. There were two large temples that stood on this large hill. Both temples were dedicated to the chief deities of the ancient world, at least the Greek world, the god Zeus and the goddess Athena. Those were the top male and female deity. I think we're familiar with both of those names. They had large temples on top of the hill, and along with that was this third structure, which was an altar of Zeus, as it was called at that time, which was a large altar that stood there that was rather open but had a number of colonnades. We're going to see some pictures of that in just a moment. But this occupied the city of Pergamus. Now, a few things quickly about the city of Pergamus that we should note and understand, just at least in the historical aspect of it. And it helps us to, again, understand what John wrote to the city, or to the church, about using a sword and where Satan dwells. Pergamus was within the region of Asia Minor at the first century. It was a Roman provincial capital. It was the seat of the Roman authority in the region at the time. That's why the sword is prominently mentioned there as Christ having the two-edged sword. They would have understood that symbol in terms of the Roman authority that was there. Pergamus was more than just a political position of authority in the Roman world at that time, but it was also a religious center. That's why you had these large temples that were there. In fact, there are some historians that record that after the fall of Babylon in 539 BC, many of the chief priests of the ancient Chaldean cults and religion there migrated west and relocated in the city of Pergamus. I use that term Pergamon. You'll understand why in just a moment, but understand I'm talking about the city of Pergamus. But these Chaldean priests, we're told, relocated in that area and set up at the time much of the Chaldean mystery religions that we read about from history that were so prominent within Babylon. But as Babylon began to recede in its prominence after the fall of the Babylonian Empire, migrations of people and religions and ideas took place, and a lot of that found its way into Pergamus. Pergamus built up as a city over the following centuries, and eventually they gave over their control to the Roman system and came under that control there. We're also told from history that the religious leaders of Pergamus even had as a title the title Pontifex Maximus, as part of their regalia, part of the titles of their official name. They were looked at as God kings in that way, in that particular area. And